to Web of Stories. My name is Melinda, and I am here to count down my top 10 books from the first half of 2023. I actually had a really good reading year. I can't remember how much I read. It's on my it's on my June wrap up. I've read books since then, so I can't remember where the cutoff is as to how many books I've read, but it's a lot. I'm way ahead of my reading goal. My goal for the year is 144, which means I'm ahead of 72 books. I'm like 84 books in the first half of the year. And I don't usually do, or I have not in the past, I should say, have not in the past done like a ranking of my books, but I decided to give it a try this year. So we'll see how it goes. Let's get started. In the number 10 spot, I have the Queen herself, Michelle Obama. This is a really interesting book. It's not exactly a memoir. I mean, her previous memoir came out like 2 or 3 years previously, so she doesn't have that much more to write. But there are memoir elements to it. It's not a self-help book. It's more of an explanation on how she has chosen to live her life in a way that is successful for her, and tips if you feel that it would work for you. I really like that setup. I'm kind of resistant to self-help. I don't like people telling me what to do, but I do like the way that she did it. Plus, she's awesome, and there are some great stories in here about how she traumatized her children at a Halloween party in the White House, accidentally, of course. But it was just a fun read. I have the physical book here, but I actually listened to this on audio. It's just the way to go because she reads it. That's the way it goes. My second book was a sad one, and this one was one of several that you'll see on this list that was for my library my Diverse Voices book club through my library, and that is Everything Here is Beautiful. This is a very sad story about two Chinese American sisters, the younger of which suffers from some sort of mental illness. Now, she never comes out and says exactly what it is, but it is at least similar to schizophrenia. Lee examines sisterhood and the immigrant experience and mental illness in this book. It was very sad. I enjoyed it. I thought it was wonderful, although someone in my book club did mention that while it is treats mental illnesses along the lines of like schizophrenia very well, there are jokes made about like OCD, which were very insensitive. I did not pick that up. She pointed it out, and then yes, I saw it. Did not change my rating on this book, but that is just something to keep in mind, and that is Everything Here is Beautiful by Mira T. Lee. The next book I do not have because it was a library book, but it was also for my Diverse Voices book club, and that is The Murmur of Bees by Sofia Segovia. This is a novel from Mexico, and it tells the story of, it's told through the eyes of a young boy, really, sort of. You have to read the book to figure out why. But his older adopted or foster brother is, he has a way with bees. He lives kind of outside of the community. And he has sort of a magical, mystical element to him. This was a beautiful book. I loved it. It's set during mostly the beginning of the 20th century. There's a big chunk that goes during like the Spanish flu epidemic, which happened in Mexico, which for some reason did not occur to me. I don't know why. Anyway, so it's a historical novel, magical realism elements, but beautiful, beautiful story. I highly recommend it. And I had never heard of it before it came up for my book club. So that's a good one. And my number 7 book, I also do not have. Now, I actually own this book, but I sent it on for my postal book group, so I don't physically have it. But this is Faithful by Alice Hoffman. And this is a story about a young woman who is dealing with, she suffers from clinical depression. There's that. But then she also survived a really horrific car accident from which she developed PTSD, and then she was in treatment for PTSD, and then something else happened which gave her even more PTSD. So that all sounds really horrible, and it is, but that's only a very small part of the book. The rest of this book is about her going to New York City and trying to develop her own life. It's a found family book. She does deal with her mental illness throughout it, but it's, as is the nature of mental illness, there are ups, there are downs. There are times when it is more prevalent, times when it is less, and Alice Hoffman does a really good job of walking through that. I really love this story. I love the family she created and the world that's in this book. I've yet to meet an Alice Hoffman book that I don't love, but that was Faithful by Alice Hoffman. Number 6, and I have talked about this one before, is Come Tell Me How You Live by Agatha Christie Mallowan. So, when I say Agatha Christie, you might think you know what this book is about, but it's not. This is not a mystery. This is a memoir about the trips that she took with her hot young second husband to the Middle East in the 30s. So the lead up to World War II. It is actually written as a love letter to her husband, so it's really sweet. But this is not a heavily plotted book. This is a book with a lot of humor and sort of wide-eyed amazement. It's a lot of fun. It is not what you would expect from Agatha Christie. And I was completely surprised by it and completely delighted by it, and I just loved it. So Come Tell Me How You Live by Agatha Christie Mallowan. Number 5. And this one is one that you see a lot of people talk about, but it's worth it. And that's Wandering Souls by Cécile Pin. This was longlisted for the Women's Book Award. It's kind of a travesty that it wasn't shortlisted, but whatever. This is a really sad but short story about a teenage girl. She's Vietnamese, and she and her two oldest younger brothers, that's right, are sent ahead of the family. They're going to be boat people and go to the United States. And remember to hold the book up. So she and her two brothers set off. Their first stop is Hong Kong, and the plan is that they will meet with their family in Hong Kong. But the rest of the family never arrives. And through things that happen, instead of ending up in the United States, they end up in Thatcher's England. So a lot of this book is her experience being a refugee in Thatcher's England. It's beautifully written. It's heartbreaking. Very interesting narrative book structure. I don't know if I'd say narrative structure, but book structure. I really enjoyed this. I thought it was beautiful. I won this through a Goodreads giveaway, not knowing anything about it. So I was completely blown away, surprised by it. And it was very good. And I can't wait to see what Cécile Pin comes out with next. Okay, number 4. This boy, The Lincoln Highway by Amor Towles. This is the second Amor Towles book I've read. The first was A Gentleman in Moscow. I still have Rules of Civility on my shelf to read. I'd known about this book for a while. I had read the synopsis of it and it did not sound interesting to me, so I didn't think much about it. But then I thought, I'm going to give it a try during Big Book Summer. It's a big book. It meets the criteria. And I ended up loving this book. The characters in it are so vividly and wonderfully drawn. This is a book with it's not a magical realism book, but there are some elements in it that have that sort of wonder of magical realism. The world of 1950s, 1954 America is perfectly drawn. I loved this book. Rules of Civility has been it's a higher priority now. It's got to be good. I mean, I've loved the other 2 books I've read, so definitely pick up The Lincoln Highway by Amor Towles. I liked it better than Gentleman in Moscow. Just saying. Okay, top 3. And I've talked about these before. You've seen them in other videos. This one is Body Grammar. I did a review of this one. This is a debut novel by a local to me author in Portland, Oregon. And it's about Lou. So Lou she's just graduated from high school. For years, she has been approached by modeling scouts, trying to recruit her because she has a very unique androgynous look. But she is not interested. She actually wants to be a photographer, not have pictures taken of her. And she has a crush on her best friend, Ivy. And she has another friend named Catherine to whom she's really close to. And shortly after graduation, she and Catherine and Ivy go down to Eugene, where Catherine's sister is a student, because Ivy's band is going to play. And they're all staying there. And then they're staying there with Catherine's sister and then Catherine's sister's boyfriend. And Lou gets the idea, we shall go to a hike. We'll do a hike. And they go do a hike and something horrible happens. And Lou feels a lot of guilt for this. It's actually pretty clear to the reader it's actually PTSD that she's going to. But as sort of a reaction to that, she sort of on a whim takes up the offer from one of these modeling agents and joins the world of high fashion modeling. And she ends up going to to New York, all over the world, Paris, Milan, all those places, even though she's not super excited to be there. So this is a book about trying to figure out your place in the world. And in some ways, I really related to Lou, because I remember going through a time in my life when I was a bit older than her. I was a college graduate at the time, but I didn't know. I had taken a job across the country kind of on a whim, and I didn't, I was trying to figure out where I belonged in the world. I love this book. It was beautiful. Cannot wait to see what else comes out from Jules Oman. Highly recommending it. Okay, my top 2 books. I've only given 2 5-star books this year. I am really stingy with my 5 stars. 4.5 is usually my high mark. And if you follow me on Goodreads, it looks like I give a lot more 5 stars because I round up. But 4.5 is usually my high mark. And 5 stars are reserved for books that become my they're up there, all-time favorite books. And the first one is one that really surprised me that it got 5 stars. Mostly because it's a short story collection, and short story collections just get 4 stars from me all the time. But this one got 5 stars. And this is the Beadworkers. And if you can tell from this cover here, that's Portland, Oregon. The author's actually, she's a member of the Nez Perce tribe. She lives in California now. I'm not entirely sure if she's from Oregon or Idaho, but the stories in this book most of them are centered in the Portland or the Oregon area. There is one story that's set in my hometown of Salem, Oregon, which that doesn't happen ever, other than, the only other thing I can think of that's written there is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. But, and they're about Native Americans to this area. And a lot of times when you read books by Native Americans, they're by authors from very large tribes, like the Dene or the Chippewa, the Sioux, whatever. I'm sorry, I think Sioux is not a term that's used, and I'm sorry, it's lost my head what the preferred term is. But anyway, you don't hear a lot from these smaller tribes, which makes sense because there aren't as many of them. But it is nice to read about them, especially when they're from your area. So there's that element, but there's also the element that these stories are just beautiful. They deal with friendships and relationships so amazingly well. My breath was taken away with this book. It's not a well-known book. If you can find it, get it. If you like short story collections, highly, highly recommend it. Okay, so finally, for my top book of the year, it should not be a surprise. And I want to point out that as I said, I only gave 2 5-star books this year, but my top 3 books are all local-ish authors. And this is, I've talked about this a lot. This is Mink River by Brian Doyle. So Brian Doyle, unfortunately, is deceased, but he was from New York, but he lived in Oregon. They tell a story like he met his wife and he came to Oregon to visit her in, I think, May, and he fell in love with Oregon in May, but he started living here in February, and that's a big difference. If you're from Oregon, you know. This is set in a small coastal town. It's a fictional town, but it could be any small coastal town on the Oregon coast. They don't give you a time when this is set, but I can kind of tell by what's going on. It's probably the late 70s, early 80s, because the timber and the fishing industries are in decline, but the tourism industry, which is quite big on the Oregon coast now, hasn't really extended past the larger cities like Seaside and Lincoln City and Newport. So these small towns on the Oregon coast are still very small. And this is just about the people in the town. There's a magical element, realism element, that's what I'm trying to say, about this book that is done so well. There's a lot of humor, but there's beauty and sadness in this as well. It's about the individual people of the town as well as the town itself. This has become not only my #1 book of the year so far, but my favorite book of all time. But of course, I will also say that while I will gladly recommend this book to anyone, it's probably very personal to me as to why it is my #1 book of all time. I would not expect this to be anyone else's #1 book of all time, favorite book of all time, but it is for me. And I love this book, and it is Mink River by Brian Doyle. There is I don't know if it's actually a sequel. It follows one of the characters after the events of this book, called The Plover, which is on my to-be-read shelf, so hopefully I will get to that one soon. So those are my top 10 books of the first half of the year. What I am planning to do in probably January is to do my top 10 books in one video. I'll do this in one video. My top 10 books of the second half of the year, and then combine the lists and do top 10 for the year. We'll see how that works. Anyway, if you made it this far, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.